Bridge to Terabithia. Chapter 1, Jesse Oliver Aarons Jr. Summary. Jess Aarons, an 11-year-old boy living on a country farm with his parents and four sisters, has nurtured one dream all summer, all summer long. When a school opens, he longs to be the fastest runner in the third, fourth, and the fifth grades. Each day and recess races are organized among those three grades, and now that Jess is in fifth grade and at the top of the ladder, he is confident that he can outrun them all. Bridge to Terabithia opens with his morning training run in the cow pasture. As he runs, he thinks excitedly of the race coming up and basks in the idea of winning and distinguishing himself in front of everyone. He pictures the amazement of his schoolmates and the admiration of his family. However, he is called sharply back to reality when his mother calls him in to breakfast, complaining that he has run too long and will have to milk the cow when he has finished breakfast. Coming into the house, he is tackled by his mother and winked at by his older sisters, Ellie, the oldest, and Brenda, the second oldest, who make nuisances of themselves in general by pestering their mother for money for school and bickering over the chores. We also meet Mabel, Jess's 6-year-old sister, who admires Jess a great deal and gets along better with him than do the others, and Joyce and his 4-year-old sister, who is young enough to be simply a pain in the neck. Brenda and Ellie coax money out of their mother for back to school shopping, which leaves Jess to do all the chores as usual, he thinks grumpily. At the end of the chapter, Mabel brings Jess the news that a new family is moving into the old Perkins place, which is the farm next door to theirs. Jess shrugs off the news and carries on with the chores. Chapter 2, Leslie Burke. Leslie Burke. Summary. Just finishes the chores with his mother today, as she has been canning beans, and the resultant heat from all the boiling has put her in a terrible mood and worn Jess out. He makes a dinner for his little sisters and then stretches out to draw for a little while. Jess, we find, has both a talent and a passion for art, a talent which nobody appreciates except for the music teacher at school, Miss Edmonds. Jess is deeply in puppy love with Miss Edmonds. She is like a breath of fresh air to him in the succulent atmosphere of his school, Lark Creek Elementary, which is very, very much like an extension of his home environment. At school, the teachers are prone to nagging, and the students are generally catty and demonstrate little intellectual curiosity or desire to learn. Compared with the rest, Miss Edmonds is extraordinarily sweet, kind, and beautiful. Most of the kids pretend not to like her, citing her hippie like aura, but Jess adores her and knows that deep down, and so do the others. Music class is the only time at school when the students are allowed to let their hair down and relax and have fun. Jess shares a special relationship with Miss Edmonds as she gives him the positive feedback and attention that he cannot find anywhere else. She is the only person he has shown his art to since he attempted to show it to his father years ago when his father became angry and more or less accused Jess of being a sissy. Miss Edmonds, however, assures suggests that his work shows real promise and offers to help him in any way she can. She senses that he is an unusual child who is out of place in the world of Lark Creek Elementary, the proverbial diamond in the rough, she calls him. Although Jess feels that description is more suited unto Miss Edmonds herself than to him. He basks in the feeling of being cared for and appreciated. Again, Jess is called out of his reverie by a call from his mother, a reminder to get on with the milking as he milks the rest of the family trickles in. Ellie and Brenda from shopping and his father from work. Jess watches and admires as Mabel runs to her father and is picked up and hugged and kissed. As Jess puts it, it seemed he had been thought too old for that kind of thing since the day he was born. Throughout the night, the only thing his father says to him directly is, mighty late with the milking, aren't you, son? The next morning, Jess goes out for his morning run. As usual, he is interrupted by a comment from a person sitting on their fence. If you are so scared of the cow, why don't you just jump the fence? At first, Jess cannot tell if the person speaking to him is a boy or a girl. He or she introduces him herself as Leslie Burke, one of the new neighbors. Eventually, Jess comes to the correct conclusion that Leslie is a girl. He is more or less indifferent to her, and he shrugs her off and goes back to the house to finish the chores. This also points up the essential uselessness of such gender demands. Just faces these demands every day, starting with his father's expectation that he will possess certain masculine qualities and eschew other feminine attributes. Jess is constrained in his search for individuality because he goes not fit He does not fit into some ready-made masculine model. His artwork is a good example of his confusion. Despite the clear talent that he demonstrates, his father is scornful because drawing is not a boy's pastime. Also, Jeff's father's lack of demonstrated affection towards Jess is likewise a good indicator of his view that Jess is a young man and that men aren't given to such displays of emotion and affection. This is probably why Jess is so anxious to win the races at school, because running happens to be a skill of his that is coincidentally identified with masculine qualities. In winning the races, he will prove to his father then he can be a man's man after all. Nevertheless, this expectation of manliness and clouds Jeff's ability to discern who he really is. Leslie, however, is wholly apart from this struggle. Her short hair and a boy's strength liberate her from the need to be either feminine or masculine. She is allowed to discover who she really is without reference to arbitrary gender designations. Chapter 3: The Fastest Kid in the Fifth Grade. It is the first day of school and back into the grid for Jess, whose only consolation is that the first race of the year will take place at afternoon. He comes to class to find that Leslie is in his class as well. Already she is a target for malicious taunting since she has come in cut-offs and a t-shirt, apparently not realizing or else not caring that the rest of the students show up for the first day of school in their Sunday best. Just lives through the morning in a fever of anticipation, waiting for the races at recess. After a morning's worth of endurance of a typical teacher irritability and peer annoyances, recess begins and the races are about to start. Jess is watching quietly as Gary Potter bosses everyone around when Leslie comes up to stand beside him. Gary begins to get too high handed, running the races autocratically and unfairly. So Jess stands up to him, demanding that two boys who tied in their heat both be allowed to run in the finals. Gary, angered, derisively suggests that perhaps Jess wants to let a girl run. Jess agrees and tells her she can run in his race. In his heart, when the race begins, Jess is supremely confident and proud of the speed he has gained over the summer. He imagines everyone is watching in awe, noticing how much he has improved. But all of a sudden, he senses a figure drawing close to him, then ahead of him. As the figure pulls across the finish line, he can see that it is Leslie. Gary wants to kick Leslie out of the race now that she has had her chance and run in her heat may be hard. But she demands to run in finals. Jess backs her up, despite his humiliation and disappointment, by challenging Gary and asking if he's scared to race her. Gary reluctantly agrees to let her race, and she wins the finals as well. After the race, Leslie tries to befriend him, telling him he is the only kid in this Durant school worth shooting, but he brushes her off brusquely, telling her, "So shoot me." He continues to avoid her throughout the day, and when he sees her running toward her home after school in her graceful rhythmic run, he shrugs off the admiration which wells up within him and turns homeward. However, her running is not simply meant to portray her as a tomboy, although running athletically is often thought of as a masculine pursuit. Um, Patterson is careful to convey the grace and beauty of Leslie's run, and giving it a more feminine quality. Leslie blends traits of both genders seamlessly, which lends her individuality, previously unheard of it, the world of Clark Creek Elementary. However, whether or not Leslie's speed is evidence of an aspect of masculinity or no, there is no question that Jess perceives her with win to impugn, impugn his own masculinity. When Jess loses to her, he feels it and to be a threat unto his own tenuous sense of masculinity. And this feeling worsens when he realizes he has lost a good chance to win his father's attention and affection. His instinctive dislike of Leslie is born of all these things. He has the sense that she is a dangerous interloper who will not fit in the standard mold, which is coupled with her defeat of him and the disintegration of his dreams. Nevertheless, Jess's moral fortitude is demonstrated clearly in his response to her win. Rather than allowing Leslie to be kicked out of the finals, an action which would likely result in his own admission into the finals as the second place winner in his heat and make it possible to attain his dream of winning, he instead insists that she run in the finals as well. His sense of pride may be one reason that he does this, but there is also the simple element of fairness involved. This is an early sign of the qualities that distinguish Jess from most of his peers. He has an inherent and developed sense of justice, an ability to care about others, and an uncultivated but nevertheless sharp intelligence. Jess stands in contrast to his schoolmates, and Leslie certainly stands out and thus the two of them seem to stand united against the rest. The portrayals of their classmates are perhaps a little one one dimensional. The boys all seem somewhat dim and the girls somewhat catty. Patterson apparently does not mean to distinguish the general run of Jess as schoolmates on an individual basis, which gives one of the impression that there is precious little individuality to be found in that school. Chapter 4, Rulers of Terabithia. The first week of school passes, in which things seem unbearable for Jess, school is as boring and seemingly pointless as ever, but worse. Leslie continues to join the races at recess, and each day she wins. Enthusiasm for the races begins to die down as the boys' dissatisfaction and humiliation at being beaten by a girl grows. By the end of the week, it is understood that there will be no more races. Jess continues to avoid Leslie, unable to be around her without being reminded of his own shame and being irked by her inability to fit into the Lark Creek elementary mold. The one bright spot on the horizon is Miss Edmonds' weekly visit to the school. She comes on Friday finally, and with her is a lift in Jess' spirits. During class, they sing Free to Be You and Me, and Jess is transported. In the middle of the song, he suddenly realizes how silly he has been in avoiding Leslie, sensing intuitively that they could be great friends, and smiles across the room at her. Leslie correctly interprets his smile and sits beside him on the bus that afternoon. In their conversation, Jess learns a lot about Leslie. He comes from an affluent town with a good school district, much different from this area, and that so far she hates her new home. She learns that her parents moved to uh, reassess their value structure, meaning that they decided they were too hooked on money and success. So they bought that old farm and they are going to farm it and think about what's important. Most daunting of all is that Jess learns that Leslie's family is rich in the poverty of the world he lives in. Jess can hardly understand this last fact, and in the end, he simply was to ignore it. All these differences are perhaps summed up in their worst line in an incident that takes place at the school. One day in school, Miss Mears reads aloud an essay that Leslie wrote on scuba diving, an essay that hits Des hard for its vivid description of the underwater world tapped into his own fears of the water. After the essay has been read, Miss Mears announces that there is to be special on Jacques Cousteau on television that night and asks the class to watch this special and write a one-page essay about it. Leslie reluctantly but bravely raises her hand, and tells Miss Mears that she cannot do the assignment because her family does not have a TV set. The class is shocked and disdainful and makes fun of her at recess. Leslie avoids Jess as he tries to comfort her and after school dashes to the back of the bus and sits in what Jess knows to be the seventh grade's private territory. Jess runs to the back of the bus and tries to retrieve Leslie, but um, Janice Avery, and the ultimate school bully, catches them there. Jess forces himself to stand up to her, making a crack about her weight, and then Jess and Leslie shoulder past Janice and make their way to their usual seats. Jess' defiance of Janice seems to have cheered Leslie up somewhat, perhaps helping her to realize that there is someone in the school who likes her and is willing to fight for her. And she suggests that they do something together that afternoon. Mabel tries to push in, and Leslie gives her a set of brand new paper dolls and that her grandmother had sent her to placate her. Jess and Leslie have the afternoon to themselves. They spend the afternoon swinging on an old rope hanging from a tree near the creek. As they swing, Leslie suggests that they need a place just of their own, apart from the rest of the world and known only to them, a secret, magic land of which they would be the rulers. Jess is excited by the idea, so they cross the creek to the woods. They decide to build their castle stronghold just on the other side of the creek, which relieves Jess. Jess does not like the darker parts of the woods, where it was almost like being underwater. Leslie names their secret land Terabithia. Yes, and Leslie's friendship continues to grow and deepen in the next couple of months, both in school and in Terabithia. They face the harassment of Janice Avery and the teasing of their schoolmates and Jess's sister, who assume and insist that Jess and Leslie are boyfriend and girlfriend rather than just friends. Leslie even helps school to go by faster and Jess, relating to him all sorts of mischievous imaginings about the teacher. The only problem in their friendship is that when they are not in Terabithia, they are not really comfortable spending time at either family's house. Leslie's parents intimidate Jess because of their education, money, and a less parental relationship with Leslie. Yes, parents disapprove of his consuming friendship with that girl who dresses funny. Ellie and Brenda tease them constantly, and Mabel continually tries to hone in on their time together. Terabithia is the only place they can escape to, and Jess feels himself to be a new person the second he is swung across the creek on the old rope. Near the end of the chapter, Jess gathers the nerve to bring Leslie into the deep pine forest he is slightly afraid of, and Leslie manages to put his fears to rest by assuming him that it is haunted by the spirits of beautiful things. That is, that it is a skilled place that even the rulers of Terabithia must not frequent on light matters. Just listens to the silence for a moment, and suddenly it seems very different than it had before. Chapter 5, The Giant Killers. One day on the bus, Mabel makes the mistake of shrieking across the bus to a friend that her father gave her Twinkies in her lunch. Unsurprisingly, Janice Avery steals Mabel's Twinkies at lunchtime. Mabel immediately runs screaming to Jess, demanding that he beat her up. Jess is loath and to do so, since Janice is a lot bigger than he, but Mabel insists that he is just yellow and that a good big brother would beat her up. Leslie intervenes and tells Mabel that she and Jess will find some other way of getting back at Janice, explaining that the principal will kick Jess out of the school if he is caught fighting a girl. Jess grateful agrees. Jess gratefully agrees. In Terabithia, they come up with a plan. They write a love letter to Janice from Willard Huffs, the boy every girl in the seventh grade has a crush on. The letter says that Willard is madly in love with Janice and wants to walk her home from school the next day. The next day in school, Jess slips it into her desk. Sure enough, Janice falls for it and misses the bus the next day, only to have to walk home alone. When Willard obviously does not show up, Janice feels a little bit badly for her, but feels they could not have done anything else. The next morning, Janice is furious, and Mabel is thrilled to know that her brother did so much for her.